right now people are grasping the sleeves of the Jews, but it's not often in favor. The anti-Semitism is on the rise. People are just attacking Israel, and chief among them, funding a lot of the attacks against Israel, is modern day Iran. So I'm really excited to hear what Bill Salus has to say. He's just a great friend, a gracious man, and we're glad to have him on the program. So, Dr. Bill Salus, thanks so much for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Hey, JV, thanks for inviting me again.
It's my pleasure. One of the things I like best about you is your taste of colors in shirts. Obviously, it is divine and God ordained. And no, I'm just kidding there. But yeah, a nice shirt. We just need to get you one with a logo on it. That's the only thing that's missing.
I
So
know I'm missing the NBW.
yeah, there you go. There you go. Well, congratulations again on receiving the doctorate. I can't think of a better guy, honestly, with the diligence and depth of research that you have engaged in over the last several decades. And it's always a pleasure to talk with you. So let's jump right in. We want to talk about the Elam prophecies, and that's, of course, Iran. But kind of tell us what's going on and how this all fits potentially into Bible prophecy.
Well, probably you're alluding to the Elam prophecy, of course, dealing with Iran. The reason that might become kind of relevant at this point in time is the recent deaths of two key people, of course, number 2 and 3 men of Iran behind Ayatollah Khomeini, Raisi and Amir Abdollahian. I'm not sure that's how you pronounce it. Easier for me to say, not pronounced right, but and of course, I was on a show with Tom Hughes recently, and we were talking about that song by Frank Sinatra. It says, "That's life, that's what the people say. You're riding high in April, shot down in May." Well, kind of ironically, on April 13th, one of the greatest endorsers of those 320 missiles being sent over to Israel was Raisi, as well as the other foreign minister, who are both dead now. They were riding high in April, but then again on May 19th, they were shot down. The question is, was that coincidental or was that providential? And in my estimation, we know, and they're still trying to figure out if it was an accident with the weather. May very well be, but I don't personally see it as an accident when it comes to the fact that God's in Daniel chapter 2, verses 20 and 21, it says it's God who changes times and seasons and removes and raises up kings and gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those with understanding. In my estimation, here's these guys who want to wipe Israel off the map, shot missiles through the air to do that, but in turn, and I would say in a curse for curse in kind out of Genesis chapter 12, verses 3, God's foreign policy, instead of cursing Israel successfully, they were cursed successfully as their helicopter became shot out of the sky. And I don't mean shot out with a missile. We don't know that. I mean, the helicopter was turned into like a missile, and God pretty much, in my estimation, went boom. We'll take you two guys out of here right now because of the curse for curse and kind clause in Genesis chapter 12. That's my thought on that. And then it says in that prophecy, it says Jeremiah 49 verses 38. And the Elam prophecy is Jeremiah 49 verses 34 through 39. It's only 6 verses. And I think we'll have time permitting, we'll go through those in a summary, Reader's Digest. But it says in Jeremiah 49:38, I will establish my sovereignty over Elam, and I'll explain what Elam is in just a moment. And I will destroy from there the king and their leaders. Now, I'm not saying that's a fulfillment of this prophecy, but it's a segue, the recent deaths of these guys. But it's a great segue into the prophecy. Of course, now, when you look at Elam, Jeremiah writes about Elam in 596 BC, and that is the western side of modern-day Iran. It hugs the Persian Gulf, sort of southwestern. Sort of where Shar nuclear reactor is. It's where all the many of the underground missile launchers and portable rocket launchers are. Their underground air base. It's, of course, where all 320 of those missiles came from. That's the closest part from Iran to Israel. And it's a subject of this prophecy now. About 20 years later, Ezekiel, a contemporary of Jeremiah, writes about Persia in Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 5. And many of your viewers are familiar with the Ezekiel 38 prophecy, very powerful. But we have two distinctly different prophecies. Jeremiah writes about Elam, the west side of Iran, and Ezekiel writes about Persia. And I believe a subsequent prophecy that will find fulfillment in Ezekiel 38. And of course, the modern day map of Iran shows Elam would be Elam and Persia. The thing is, therefore, the king or leader of Elam would, of course, be Ayatollah Khomeini and Raisi. Leaders, of course, would be either Raisi or the Ahmadinejad, the other guy. So, I mean, it's interesting that happened. I don't believe it was coincidental, JB.
Yeah, I don't believe in coincidences, especially when it's much more naturally explained by a conspiracy. We don't know, to be truthful, as you said, but it certainly is noteworthy to me that in the midst of all of this escalation and all eyes are on Israel and Iran, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the number 2 and number 3 guy get killed. And you're right. Ultimately, God is the one in charge, and so whether he used weather or he used an enemy nation or a faulty engine or whatever it is, he got them taken care of. And I think the biggest fear is who comes in next, right? And what as you said, this is sort of the precursor, setting the stage for the potential. And I think I mentioned in the opening, I was kind of talking about the Gog Magog war and some of the other wars, and of course Iran is involved in both. But the question is what's happening now setting the stage potentially for Gog Magog, Ezekiel 38, or is it something different? And that's really where you're coming from, right?
Yeah, and I do believe they're distinctly different prophecies. Why don't we kind of do a Reader's Digest view of the prophecy, so that as we talk about why it would not be the same as Ezekiel 38, and why maybe even handle a couple of objections as to why it's still a unfulfilled prophecy, and then maybe why it's relevant now in light of respects to what's recently happened to Raisi, but not only just Raisi, but I mean April 13th, that massive attack that of Iran against Israel. Fortunately, 99% of those missiles were intercepted, and we'll call those, for the sake of talking about this prophecy, we're going to call those missiles, we're going to call them arrows, which is what they would be termed as, of course, in the vocabulary of a guy like Jeremiah's time back, about 596 BC. And he talks about in the prophecy that the bow will be broken, not the missiles intercepted, but the bow will be broken. So I think it's important to realize that they want to wipe Israel off the map. That's a stated intention of Raisi and of course Ayatollah, as well as the foreign minister that was killed. And God instead is in turn going to have a disaster happen in the Elam territory. So do we want to get a little bit into the prophecy, and then we can kind of build from there?
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of run us through an overview and then give us your insights on it.
The prophecy gets the Lord fiercely angry with them because why? Because they want to launch something lethal somewhere. Who does? The leaders. There's bad leaders in Iran. So what we're told here is he will, as I read in the verse, that he will destroy from there the kings and the officials. They want to launch something lethal somewhere, and I believe that would probably be Israel, although we're not told the destination, because he says, I will break the bow of Elam at the foremost of their might, prohibiting them being able to launch perhaps nuclear weapons, which at this point, even the IAEA is coming out saying they have enough enriched uranium to have 8 explosive-ready nuclear weapons. They're not saying they have that, but they've increased their uranium enrichment 30 times the allowable amount in the JCPOA, and possibly have 8 nuclear-ready weapons to go. So God can't allow them to send any nuclear weapon over to Israel that could wipe it off the map, because in the other prophecy of Iran, Ezekiel 38, we're told that God's going to use that prophecy to put the world on notice. He's the covenant-keeping God of Abraham, promise-keeping God of Jesus. And so basically he says that, and he says in Ezekiel 39:7, I will make my holy name known in the midst of my people Israel. They shall not profane it anymore, and the nation shall know I'm the Lord, the Holy One in Israel, requiring there to be my people Israel, the chosen people of the Abrahamic covenant, which there are today, and the Holy One in Israel, meaning in the promised land in Israel. Now, the way God's going to do that, just in a brief summary, in Ezekiel 38, we're told that when Russia comes down with its coalition with Turkey and Iran, and there's 9 members in the consortia, altogether listed in their ancient terms, when they come down to invade Israel from the north, God's going to stop it with a great earthquake, flooding rains, pestilence, fire, hailstone, brimstone, etc. So basically, the world's going to go, wow, that was God. That was the God of the Jews, and He's going to say, yes, it was. That's why I'm making my holy name known in the midst of my people Israel. Now here comes Razi and Khomeini and these guys shooting missiles, lethal missiles at Israel. Probably going to have a nuclear weapon soon. Will be stationed in this Elam territory on the western side, if it's not already there. And God can't allow that to happen because He's got to make His holy name known in the midst of His people Israel. And unknowingly, the Iranian leaders don't realize that's what they're up against. They're trying to wipe Israel off the map, but God will not allow that to happen because He's got to make His holy name known through the very people they want to extinguish.
Yeah, I mean, it sure is striking when you look at the text itself, and then you see how things are happening geopolitically and pieces are moving into place. Talk for a minute about how you see the U.S. fitting into all this, because there's a lot of chatter out there that we are pulling further and further away from Israel. Certainly, the Biden administration has made no bones about that, and we do know that by the time the Lord comes back, Israel is alone, right? Aren't they isolated by the time of the Lord's return, or at least by the time of the start of the day of the Lord's wrath, the tribulation?
Yeah, that's yet future. I concur with you on that. With respect to America and this related to this prophecy, or in Iran in general, geopolitically right now, if I say a few more things about the prophecy, it will help us maybe see where America may or may not fit into this prophecy.
Perfect.
It goes on to talk about when the bow gets broken at the foremost of its might in the specific geographical area we talked about, where all the missiles are being launched out from, and more to come. It says it will bring about a disaster. And what happens, it says, when this happens, I'll bring the four winds from the four quarters of heaven and disperse the indigenous population, the Elamites, into all the nations of the world. It says there'll be no nations, plural, where the outcasts of Elam don't go. It's a worldwide dispersion. It seems like precipitated by probably a humanitarian crisis. And that's the disaster. And it goes on to say, I will pursue Elam with the sword. I will pursue Elam with the sword until they are consumed. Now, that would be a reference to probably a military confrontation. It says at the time that this disaster happens, Elam will be dismayed before its enemies, plural, meaning more than one. Of course, at this point, Iran has more than one enemy. Israel, of course, wants to take out their nuclear facilities. And let me just throw this out there real quickly, and I'll come back into the America thing as another potential enemy. Israel has been saying recently, some of the leaders, that the war will probably go on until 2026. And with intense fighting increased in the north around September. Recently, a leader came out today in Iran and says at least the war with Hamas will go to the end of this year, perhaps even into 2025. So my point being is that if this war is going to linger on and Israel is not really at liberty to fight a war of attrition against its enemies, it's probably under the impression it's got some ability to do that presently. But once the whole onslaught comes at them with, thousands of missiles from Hezbollah, chemicals from Syria, more missiles from Iran, Houthis sending in precision-guided missiles. Once that happens, Israel will not be able to fight a war of attrition. I think that's when you'll see some nuclear weapons come off the shelf, Damascus get destroyed. Anyway, I'm getting way ahead of myself. But it does say that there'll be enemies first. So we're not told who is used probably militarily to take out Elam, but we are told that when Elam is taken out, probably militarily, there are a menu of enemies. And therefore, one of those enemies could be America. We know that when the arrows were intercepted, the missiles intercepted over Israel, those 320 missiles, we know that the US, the UK, Saudi Arabia, surprisingly, on some smaller level, of course, Israel, were involved to intercept those missiles, which thank God they did. Otherwise, you would have had some serious casualties with those missiles were intended to hit.
Yeah, war would have taken a totally different direction instantly at that point. Could have ended up in World War III, frankly. So, if this prophecy, which in your view is a near prophecy, right, one that'll happen before Gog and Magog, am I right?
I believe so. I think Elam gets hit real hard. By the way, Elam's not listed in Ezekiel 38 among the belligerents, with Gog and Magog and Meshech and Tubal and Persia, etc. I think that's intentional because they're involved in this prophecy. Ezekiel does know about Elam in Ezekiel chapter 32. He mentions them alongside another prophecy of Meshech and Tubal. But he, I believe, intentionally omits Elam from his prophecy, which is very descriptive about who's included. Why would he not include Elam?
But isn't Persia also a portion of modern day Iran?
Persia is, and he includes Persia, but he omits Elam.
Okay.
I don't want to make a big deal out of it, but I think that's because the Elam prophecy precedes. We're talking about the timing here.
Yeah,
I believe it precedes, but it doesn't. It's a disaster in Elam, and by the way, geographically, Elam has always been geographically isolated from Persia because of these Zagros Mountains course through those two areas. And in a nuclear fallout scenario, which appears to be what could be happening in the Elam prophecy, studies have been done with the wind patterns that about only 10% of Iran proper, mainly by Tehran, would probably be adversely affected by the radioactivity because of the mountains and the wind patterns. However, on the other side of the Persian Gulf, in the GCC countries of Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Oman, Bahrain, Qatar, etc., there's concern that about 40 to 100% of their populations could be hurt within 24 hours. Now, of course, on that side of the Persian Gulf, they're rich in oil, but they're poor in water, and 2/3 of the world's desalination plants are over there. So, of course, they got a keen eye out as potential enemies of Iran as well. So I think what happens is Iran gets hit with Elam, but it doesn't take Iran out entirely, of course, because they've got to live to fight again in Ezekiel 38 verses 5. And I think the fact that there's most of our teachers and colleagues are still focused on Ezekiel 38, which is an extremely important prophecy. I think they struggle with, well, how could Elam also be a prophecy? Because wouldn't that mitigate against Ezekiel 38? But I don't think it would. I believe you have, and matter of fact, when you look at Persia listed in Ezekiel chapter 38, 1-5 with the belligerents, it's not listed up front with Turkey and Russia. It's sort of given an honorable mention down there by Ethiopia and Libya. I'm not trying to make more out of it than we should, but perhaps they are compromised by the time they go into this Gog and Magog invasion.
No, I think that's fascinating. So just to kind of make sure I've got it clear in my mind and for our readers' sake, the distinction between Elam and Persia is geographic. And so some Bible scholars today, when sort of trying to make sense of Jeremiah 49, they see the distinction between Elam and Persia as more historical. That Elam is happened in history. It happened in the past. But what you're suggesting is that no, both of these prophecies could be future, and everybody agrees that Ezekiel 38 is future. But the distinction really there is between what part of modern day Iran is he talking about? And the first one is really wiping out that region on the other side of the mountains there, Elam. But then, as you say, Iran is not entirely wiped out as a nation. They still have a role to play in Ezekiel's prophecy, the Gog-Magog prophecy, but it's not as significant a role, and that's the reason that they're sort of mentioned down the line in the list and not in the forefront. Is that a good summary?
Yeah, that's well said. That's said better than even I did. I appreciate that.
No, you said it well. I'm just trying to make sure I understood it right. So,
and well, the other thing too, JB, to make note of, even those who advocate that the Jeremiah 49 Elam prophecy has found historical fulfillment, such as Mark Hitchcock and Andy Woods, they also have to acknowledge, because the last verse of the prophecy, I'd read verse 38, which says, I'll set my sovereignty over Elam, and I'll destroy from there the kings and the leaders and officials. But then it goes on to say in the last verse, verse 39, but it shall come to pass in the latter days that I'll bring back the captives of Elam or restore their fortunes, in some translations. So even the advocates that it's been historically fulfilled realize that there is a component that has to be filled in the latter days. And it's the same Hebrew words as in Ezekiel 38 when it talks about the latter days. I just am one who says, no, it's not been partially historically fulfilled. It is all entirely unfulfilled. Guys like Dr. Ronald Fruchtenbaum and some other people feel the same way as I do about this.
Yeah, well, I look up to all of you guys, and I think it's just fascinating to compare notes and iron sharpens iron there. Um, in some ways, I guess I should say I look up to Andy more than Arnie because Andy's so much taller than Arnie, so I have to look up to him a little bit more. But theologically, I think both of them as great men of God and colleagues, and yourself, of course, included. But we've talked about this before, you and I both offline at different times we've interacted, over a meal, and we've had you on the show to talk about it. And I'm very, very open to the whole concept that both Psalm 83 and Jeremiah 49 have an eschatological component. And I think it's not just some hasty conclusion that some sensationalist writer is out there pointing to, newspaper exegesis. I mean, you really dig deep into the text and the history and theological synthesis of it all, and it really makes a lot of sense. So let's, if you're ready, I'll throw it back to you, and let's get back into maybe modern day and how where U.S. fits into some of this.
Yeah, so I mean, we saw they're already involved in what could be the precursing stages, America, with respects to Elam, because of the helping Israel intercept those missiles that came forward. One of the things that I think we need to watch for, we see how the Houthis are busy trying to, choke off commerce coming through the Red Sea and down through the Indian Ocean and stuff like that. Iran has threatened that should they come under attack, they will shut down the Strait of Hormuz. That's a legitimate threat. They've made it on several occasions. If they do that, they're going to hurt world economies because at least 25% or so of oil and other goods come through that area there. And the only way that it can be reopened again is to confront Iran where we had to hit that Elam area because that's where they'll be protecting the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. So therefore, if America, who's already put together kind of a coalition to try to prevent the Houthis from continuing their attacks, America could be involved in trying to get the Strait of Hormuz open again and in attacking that area there to accomplish that. Now, I'm speculating, but the bottom line is if they do shut down the Strait of Hormuz, that area, you've got to get through that, as does Israel. Remember, I told you they think the war will be extended till 2026 now. I would speculate to say to you that if they think that means they're realizing that, and part of that 2 years they're talking about, they've got to take out Iran's nuclear facilities. By 2 years from now, Iran will have probably dozens of nuclear weapons at the rate they're going. So Israel's got to do business there. And if they do that, they've got to go through the Elam territory. Now, it's interesting when they struck that Isfahan area on April 19th, I think it was. They somehow got over that Elam territory and hit that area. But in reality, in a war, that's Iran's going to definitely protect itself through that Elam territory and try to send missiles at Israel through that Elam territory, try to protect the closure of the Strait of Hormuz through that Elam territory. And therefore, the international community would then be provoked more into it, including America. But we're not told specifically in the prophecy, apart from the fact that when it happens, the Elam prophecy happens, that Elam will have enemies, a menu of enemies. And of course, right now, I would say America would be one of them. And of course, when will this happen? Will this happen after the November elections this year? And who would be the administration in charge at that time? Yeah. I think if Donald Trump gets in as an example, you're going to have an entirely different foreign policy coming back to support Israel that's really wavering right now with the Biden administration.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I just literally wrote down a Trump here on my notepad because I always like to take notes when the guests are talking, and so I don't forget things that I want to ask about or bring up. But yeah, I mean, it is very interesting. A lot of times when we study Bible prophecy, we tend to think in quick terms. We expect everything to happen tomorrow, but it really is a process, and things are moving ahead in that process. For my part, I've talked a lot about the Luciferian agenda and the aspect and their blueprint and their timeline and so forth, the whole 2020s being a key decade in their plan, the year 2025 being a key year, the Agenda 2030 of the World Economic Forum, those types of things. But yeah, I think it's it's quite fascinating to consider if Trump were to get in there, and everybody knows my view on how a lot of that is rigged and controlled. But nevertheless, at the end of the day, if he becomes the president, however that happens, that's a completely different thing. I mean, but generally speaking, Republicans tend to be more, hawkish on war, and he's certainly kind of has the populist support as a patriotic leader and one who wants to let's protect our country, and it's God, Bible, Trump, kind of all in the same sentence, right? And so and guns, by the way. So yeah, if things play out, and again, as you said, this is just speculative, but it certainly fits the template that we read in Jeremiah 49, with, some type of onslaught happening to Elam that scatters them, that involves multiple enemies. Well, there's been tensions between the U.S.-Israel alliance and Iran for decades. And especially now in the last few years, it's just increasing and increasing and increasing. And so I think it would be very interesting to see what 2025 brings, assuming we get there. Because, of course, the Lord could come back today to rescue us at the rapture, and then these prophecies would be fulfilled in that gap of time between the rapture and the start of the 70th week, right? There's nothing that says they have to happen before the rapture.
Correct. They could, because there's many pre-tribulation prophecies, as is the rapture. And we don't know when the rapture is going to happen. It could happen at any given moment, but it could happen after some of these war prophecies find fulfillment, as long as it happens before the tribulation period. And one of the reasons, and there's a whole bunch of Israeli Defense Forces prophecies. Israeli Defense Forces exist in fulfillment of Bible prophecy. We're told in Ezekiel 37:10 that they would actually come out of a Holocaust type condition, these dry bones, this vision, and become an exceedingly great army. And then I'll go through in my Future War Prophecies book, my most recent one, and go through and list a bunch of these prophecies that involve the Israeli Defense Forces. And the reason I put this forward is because the Israeli Defense Forces would fight their Arab enemies, and that's who they're fighting. They're not fighting the Russian coalition. God stops that. They're not fighting the Antichrist. Jesus Christ does that at the second coming. They're fighting the Arab countries around them in Psalm 83 and Zechariah 12, verses 2 through 6, etc., many places. And they're doing this before the tribulation. And how would we know that, Bill? Well, we know that because Israel in the first half of the tribulation, the Israeli Defense Forces are pretty much complacent because Israel is living in a condition of peace that was confirmed by the false covenant of Daniel 9:27 and Isaiah 28, verses 15. Matter of fact, Ruchenbaum pointed this out to me one time I was talking to him. I said, yeah, Bill, they're not fighting in the first half of the tribulation. They can't even stop the Antichrist from going into the temple. They're became complacent at the mid part of the tribulation. And the reason I was having that conversation with Arnold is kind of interesting because, and I'll get into why it can't happen in the second half as well, because Arnold had put in his Footsteps of the Messiah book that the Psalm 83 war prophecy happened in the Great Tribulation period, which would be in the second half of the tribulation. And over a bunch of meetings with him, I pretty much said, well, how can that happen? How can they be fighting the Arabs in the first half of the tribulation when they got the peace treaty? And second, how can they be fighting the Arabs when even Jesus tells them in the mid part of the tribulation to flee to the mountains when they see the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel in the holy place? And Arnold said, no, you're right, Bill. He goes, I do. Now, his latest is he does think it was partially fulfilled in 1948, but not entirely fulfilled, because the first 8 verses do show the countries that came together in 1948 to prevent Israel from being a nation. They are all listed in the belligerents of Psalm 83, verses 6 through 8. However, and the goal of that confederacy in Psalm 83, verse 4 says, they come together to form a confederacy to wipe Israel off the map, that the name of Israel will be remembered no more. And that's what they tried to do. However, the rest of the prophecy clearly mitigates the fact that it was not fulfilled. It was just a precursor to a final fulfillment. So the point is, the Israeli Defense Forces are going to be very involved before the tribulation in a lot of unfulfilled prophecies on their rise to become an exceedingly great army. And we might see some of those prophecies before the rapture. I think that's what we're talking about here, JB.
Yeah, no doubt. I like the way you've always talked about the pre-tribulational prophecies. And, as far as the first half of the tribulation, after God supernaturally intervenes and protects Israel at the Battle of Gog and Magog, which is just a powerful display of his might, I don't think there are going to be any nations that would dare come against Israel after they sign that covenant. I think, Israel, like you said, is going to be in relative peace globally during that first 3.5 years. That's the reason our chart in our NBW chart book of the end times differentiates 3.5 years of protection or peace from 3.5 years of persecution in the second half. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that on earth as a whole things are peaceful. They're anything but, because you've got the wrath of God being poured out and the sealed judgments and the trumpet judgments, if you put those in the first half and so forth. There's all kinds of things happening, natural disasters. So it's a chaotic time indeed. But as it relates to Israel's military enemies, there don't appear to be any in that first 3.5 years. And I think, just looking at it logically, a lot of that is because the whole world witnessed Yahweh's powerful intervention in the Battle of Gog and Magog, and he showed himself mighty. Is that a fair assessment of what's happening there?
I agree, and I think that's one of the arguments of a few that's why Ezekiel 38 is probably a pre-tribulational event. Like you said, one of the things, and I quoted this earlier, is God says, "I'm going to make my holy name known in the midst of my people, and they shall not profane it anymore." And that was in Ezekiel 39:7, after he supernaturally defeats this massive coalition of Russia's, coalition coming against Israel. And I think God is going to put the world on notice that he's the covenant-keeping God of Abraham before the tribulation, before the Antichrist comes on and says, "Worship me" at the mid part of the tribulation. I don't think God's going to go, "Oy vey, I should have done this before the tribulation," and ends up doing it at the end of the tribulation. So I think that's one of the arguments that Ezekiel 38 could find fulfillment before the tribulation. The other one too, of course, we've talked about this, is at the conclusion and the aftermath of the divine destruction of Gog and Magog, the Israelis are going to actually convert the weapons into fuel and energy for 7 years. And the argument is, well, the first 3.5 years of the tribulation, they could do that. They're at peace. Would make a lot of sense. They'd convert those weapons into energy. They have the technological know-how to do that. But in the second half of the tribulation, it doesn't make any sense that they would be burning weapons, because they'd be picking them up to, fight for their existence as they're fleeing from the persecution of the Antichrist, who were told in Zechariah chapter 13, verse 8, that in his genocidal campaign, 2/3 of the Jews in the land will be cut off. But fortunately, Zechariah 13:9 says that 1/3 of them will survive the Jews. And of course, that becomes the faithful remnant. So therefore, if you can't burn weapons in the second 3.5 years of the tribulation, you would have to move it forward. They would be burning weapons for 3.5 years before the tribulation and 3.5 years into the first half of the tribulation. So I think that's another argument why Ezekiel 38 is a pre-tribulation prophecy. However, the Israeli Defense Forces still have prophecies to find fulfillment that are not involved in Ezekiel 38. And Ezekiel 38 finds Israel in a condition of peace and safety, dwelling without walls, bars, nor gates. And they can't do that right now because of the Arab enemies around them. They have to be listed in Psalm 83. Their war right now is Syria. They're bombing Syria all over the place. Matter of fact, today they bombed up by the Banias territory, which is above Lebanon on the coast of Syria, way northwestern part of Syria. They're bombing around Damascus all the time. So we've got a lot of things to be watching for that have prophetic implications, but ultimately when Israel can dwell securely, they've dealt with their enemies around them, the Israeli Defense Forces, then Israel can dwell securely, and Ezekiel 38 can find fulfillment.
Yeah, I agree with you. In my book, What Lies Ahead, a biblical overview of the end times, which is basically an eschatology text that came out several years ago, I have a whole chapter on Gog and Magog, and I list about 8 views, I think, that dispensationalists hold. And so it's not something you'd want to fight over or be dogmatic about, but I really have trouble putting it in anywhere in the tribulation period. I know our mutual friend and colleague Dr. Woods puts it there. He has a unique view on it, and we want to hold those views with a degree of humility and realizing that the Bible just doesn't flat tell us exactly where it fits in the sequence of events. But when you consider all the data from the scriptures, it seems to me that it's got to happen before the tribulation. I tend to think it'll happen after the rapture, but either way, it seems to fit in that gap of time. You just mentioned something that I think a lot of people overlook as we get ready to wrap up the program here, and that is that this things are heating up in every corner related to Israel. We're so distracted here in America by the Trump trials. All the mainstream media, all they're ever talking about is the jury and the judge, and the right says, what a crooked judge he is, and he is, by the way. And then the left says, no, what a terrible person Trump is. Well, he might be a terrible person, but I don't think he's worthy of or deserving of being arrested for simply pointing out some of the problems with the election. But all of this is a distraction. It's cake and circus. Meanwhile, things are absolutely heating up and falling into place, and so many of the things you've been talking about and writing about, you can sort of point to each day certain things happening, and you go, oh, this could be setting the stage for that, and this could be setting the stage for that. So I really think the next couple of years, particularly next year, if the Lord doesn't come back, are going to be, we're going to see just a complete flood of pre-tribulational prophecies come to pass, don't you think?
I do, and I think that the genie has come out of the Mideast bottle. Pandora's box has been opened. I don't believe anything's going to change now back to status quo. You basically, at this point in time, you have Israel in a very war mode situation. Many of your viewers may have been to the old city in Jerusalem. Do you realize that at this point, since October 7th, most all of those stores are closed? They used to, the vendors in those open streets, open market, used to sell about 100 products a day. Now, if they sell one every 2 weeks, they're amazed. They're living off their savings. You look at Tom Hughes recently went there with one of the first tours that was going back into Israel just a couple months ago, I think. And he said he got into a car with this guy for the tour, an Arab guy. And the Arab guy says, "You're the first customer I've had since October 7th.
Wow.
And then you look at he said when he was in Elat, southern part of Israel, he was in hotels with a lot of evacuees from the northern part of Israel. And I remember they've been evacuated around since October 7th, about 80,000 of them living in, hotels and wherever they can at this point in time. And Israel has to deal with that northern border. And that's why they're saying around September, they're going to intensify that. There'll probably be a full-fledged war going on at that point with the northern part of Hezbollah at that point. I think at this point, Iran is just sort of playing different phases with this war, with his proxies against Israel. Houthis, causing some havoc by the Red Sea. Hezbollah continuing to throw a few hundred missiles here and there, just pinpricking. Of course, the Hamas issue. Of course, the international community is pressuring Israel not to go into Rafah right now to finish the job. It's a real mess. But at this point in time, Israel's going to have to go to war. They're going to have to finish off their enemies, and one of the enemies that's going to find fulfillment, probably a Bible prophecy fulfilled soon, is the destruction of Damascus in Isaiah 17. Verse 1 tells us it'll cease from being a city, it'll be a ruinous heap. Verse 9 says in Isaiah 17, the desolation is caused by the children of Israel. And verse 14 says that one night you see Damascus, speaking of him in the masculine pronoun, but in the morning he is no more. This is the portion of those who plunder us and rob us, meaning in self-defense. Israel has to pull out its best weapon and take out a city. Yeah. And when Israel pulls out a nuclear weapon, the world is going to be just blown away.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I know good scholars disagree on the Damascus prophecy there, but I think that prophecy, when it comes to fulfillment, is going to be akin to 1948 in Jerusalem, or Israel becoming a nation. It's going to get everybody's attention, and everybody's going to go, "Whoa, we're there, we're there." Well, yeah, and in your flurry of metaphors there, you talked about how the genie is out of the bottle and the Pandora's box has been opened. I'm glad you didn't say the cat is out of the bag, because we like to leave cats in the bag around here. So I'm just kidding. We love cats, but they taste like chicken. But anyway, my listeners know my propensity for cat jokes. Well, Dr. Bill Salus, a gentleman and a scholar. You've always been a scholar in my book, and of course now, rightly so, well-deserved doctorate, and we appreciate that. So, folks, as we get ready to close, I want to remind you that, as you think about all of these pieces of the puzzle coming together, the most important thing you want to think about is your relationship with Almighty God, who is in control of these nations. As Bill quoted at the outset here, he's the one that puts kings in place in the context of the recent death of some of the leaders in Iran. So he's the one in charge, and that's who you need to be focused on the most, is what's your relationship with him. And if there's never been a time in your life when you've placed your faith in Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who died and rose again for your sins, to pay your personal sin debt, then you need to do that today. Today is the day of salvation. Things are definitely heating up. It's time to get right with God. And the only way you can do that, not by your own efforts, not by works, as our ministry proclaims again and again, not by your performance, but simply by receiving the free gift paid for by the blood of Christ. And you do that by faith. So who are you trusting in today to forgive your sin and give you eternal life? I hope it's Jesus Christ and him alone. For the rest of us, I tell you what, keep looking up. Things are definitely getting exciting. Bill, any closing thoughts?
No, I like the way you summarized and closed. Really, at this point in time, that is the key for the viewers here. If they've not received Jesus Christ as their Savior, you can obviously see with what we're talking about that these are the end times, and the key point of the end times is Jesus is going to come and get his church out of here before the wrath and the tribulation period starts. And you want to get a ticket to paradise like that, like JB is talking about. Take Jesus Christ into your heart and mind as your Savior, receive him as your Savior, and do it now before it's too late, because you do not want to be left behind to go through the perilous period of time the Bible talks about, called the tribulation period.
Amen. Yeah, and if the Lord tarries, things are going to continue to get bad. We're certainly not promised that we won't have to suffer. In fact, the church has suffered incredibly for 2,000 years in many parts of this world. But here in America, we've been sheltered from a lot of that. But we know we won't be here for the outpouring of God's wrath in Daniel's 70th week, but we certainly could see things get a lot worse. So now's the time to evaluate and make sure you know the Lord Jesus. Well, folks, have a great rest of the week. We've got some great guests coming up. Don't forget, we've got Patrick Wood coming on Friday. Always love talking with him about the technocracy that's rising. We got Brad Maston this week. But anyway, have a great rest of the day, and we will talk again soon. God bless everyone.
I really want to thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, and if you've not already done so, please consider subscribing to our YouTube page at Prophecy Depot Ministries. Bill Salus, you can go on YouTube and search Prophecy Depot Ministries. Also, take the time to visit our product page at prophecydepot.com. You'll find my books and DVDs there. We even have bundle deals, discounts of books and DVDs for you. While you're there, also check out our Spiritual Survival Kit for Those Left Behind thumb drive. It's specifically designed for your loved ones who might get left behind, so they can know it's forthcoming in the days in which they'll be living. It would include a Bible, some letters of instructions from me to them, my books and DVDs for the Here to Eternity series, the Now Prophecies, what could happen now at the present time, the Next Prophecies, what has a few preconditions but are stage setting, could happen after the Now Prophecies. The Now Prophecies have no more preconditions. The Last Prophecies, which include the prophecies in the first half of the tribulation, the Final Prophecies, which include the prophecies in the second half and final half of the tribulation. And then we conclude the series with the Millennium Prophecies and the New Jerusalem. Additionally, while you're there, you'll see my new book and DVD called The Future War Prophecies. And you see some of the topics that are discussed there: the First War of Elam, of Iran, the war we talked about in this video with Israel and Syria, the proxy war that shakes Israel, Psalm 83, Ezekiel 38. You see the list of these different topics up there. Please visit and consider purchasing this book and DVD as well.